Hello Stampers, welcome back to Handmade with Holly. My name is Holly Michelson. I'm an independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator living in Del Mar, New York, just outside of Albany. Today I have a sweet project for you. We're going to be using the triangle layout in order to make this cute card. The triangle layout is a really quick and simple way to make a high impact visual on your card. It gives you the opportunity to use both sides of the designer series paper for some extra pop on your card front. We're going to be demonstrating this technique today using the Sweet as a Peach stamp set. Now, this stamp set can be purchased individually or it can be purchased with the coordinating dies as a bundle. If you purchase the two items together using a single product code, you can save an additional 10%, and that savings will be available until May of 2022. In addition to this stamp set and matching dies, we're also going to use one die from the Stitch So Sweetly die set. Now, the coordinating sentiments for this stamp set did recently retire, but these are incredibly versatile dies and I use them on probably about a third of my projects. They are something that I simply couldn't or wouldn't do without. Now, in addition to our stamps and dies that we'll be using today, we're going to need some paper. I pre-cut all of my paper just to save us some time on the video. I know there's lots of great content on YouTube and you don't want to spend more time than you need to watching each video. So I have a piece of Pear Pizazz cardstock. We're going to use this for the card base. It is basically a half sheet of cardstock, so I cut it in the center and it now measures 8.5 by 5.5, and then I pre-score the cardstock. I don't know if you can see that, but it's scored right there at 4.25. In addition to the card base, we're going to need two pieces of basic white. The first piece is going to be the matting layer on the front, and the second piece is going to be an insert on the inside of the card so that we can add some extra ornamentation to the card without having to do it on Pear Pizazz. These card pieces measure 5.25 wide by 4 inches high. And we're also going to need a piece of designer series paper. This piece comes from the Peach DSP package. And if you don't choose this piece, if you're using another package of paper, if you're using a different sheet from the designer series paper, be sure that you select a piece of paper where the front and the back coordinate nicely. So if you take a look at our finished card, you'll see that the way we're going to cut the paper, we're going to showcase both the front and the back side of the paper. So you'll want to choose a piece of paper where both sides coordinate. If by chance you've selected a piece of DSP where the front and the back are not a great match, then the other option would be for you to cut two pieces of the designer series paper, same size, one from each piece of paper, and then mix and match your triangles from design 1 and design 2. And if you do that, you'll have enough designer series paper to make two cards at once. So that can also be an efficient way to make more cards quickly. You're also going to need some scrap basic white paper, and this is used to cut out the peaches, the sentiment, and also the leaves on the peaches. You can use scraps that you might have in your pile. I brought with me today a piece that was 1.5 inches wide by 11 inches long, and that's more than enough to get all the pieces that we're going to need. So now that we know what paper we need, I'm going to just go ahead and maybe put the card over there in the corner. We're going to go ahead and start with our card base. Again, I've pre-scored it, and I'm going to fold it on the score line. Give it the first fold there with my finger, and then I'm going to bring in my bone folder, and I'm going to use my bone folder to burnish this edge. And what burnishing means is it really just helps break down the fibers in the paper there so that your card folds flat and very nicely. It's not popping up and opening up, so it gives it a really good crease for your card. If you don't have a bone folder, you might be able to try something like the edge of a ruler, or perhaps even your Snips. Bone folder, though, I think is Stamper's must-have tool. If you don't have one, I highly recommend it. So that's all we need to do to make our card base. And then the next step is we're going to add our matting layer. So our matting layer here is just simply the piece of white cardstock that we pre-cut. So we're going to go ahead and bring in our cardstock that we're simply going to mount to our card base. In order to do that, we're going to use a tape runner to put adhesive around the edges of the back. You want to get some good coverage just to adhere it down. And then you're going to eyeball the 4 sides of the card base, making sure that you've left that Pear Pizazz border as evenly as you can all around the 4 sides. Now with that, we're going to just go ahead and set our card base aside for a second, and we're going to need to cut our designer series paper. So for this, I'm going to bring in our trimmer. Okay, and we're going to take our rectangle piece of DSP and put it here in the gully of our trimmer. And what you want to do is you want to line up the corner in the gully and then the corner in the gully again, but also make sure that your paper is resting against this bottom edge, which will help stop it from moving and keep it straight. Then what I like to do is move the scoring blade out of the way and grab my cutting blade. And when I drop the arm, I'm going to put the cutting blade in the center of my paper. Instead of putting my cutting blade at this corner edge or this corner edge, I'm going to drop it somewhere inside the paper. And the reason for that is to protect the corners on my triangle. If I put the blade right here at the top of the corner and cut down, I may just ever so slightly bend or ding that corner. So this is a way to prevent that from happening. You might also notice that on my trimmer, I've used a label maker to make a label that says cut and a label that says score. And that just helps me as I'm working quickly to always remember that the dark blade is the cutting blade and that the lighter gray blade is the scoring blade. So again, I've dropped my cutting blade there somewhere in the middle, and I'm going to go ahead and run it up and then back down to slice that piece of paper. Now, before you lift the arm, I just want to warn you that your objective is to keep this paper evenly together, and we're going to rotate it. So as you lift your arm, be mindful of that. You know that you're going to be trying to keep the paper together. So I'm just going to use my fingers and hold it in place, and then I'm going to rotate my paper so that the opposite corner is in the gully at the top and the bottom. Again, resting that corner along the straight edge to give me some stability and keep the paper in place, and then just visually checking that my paper is still aligned from where I cut it. Mine had shifted ever so slightly, so I used my finger to readjust it. And what's really great is the pattern on the paper is a perfect guide to help you see when your paper is aligned. So I'm going to go ahead and drop the blade and go up and back down. And now I've cut my rectangle into 4 perfect triangles. So now that we've done that, I'm going to go ahead and set the trimmer aside. And in order to make our peach pattern, what we're going to do is we're going to flip over 2 of our triangles so that we can expose the back side of the designer series paper. And this makes up the pattern that I used on the card. Now, I also have the option of leaving these triangles the way they are and instead flipping these triangles. And this would also be a great pattern. Another option is I could choose to rotate my card vertically, and I could rotate my triangles in this direction, and I could have a vertical card. Again, I could also flip these over and switch out which way I place the DSP. but I wanted you to know that you have two different layout options in the horizontal view or two different options in the vertical view. Okay, so now we're going to need to put some adhesive on the back of our DSP so that we can attach it to our card base. When I do that, I like to use my silicone mat. And the reason for that is that we really want to get adhesive right into the corners here of the triangle so that we can ensure that the DSP stays flat on our card. So I like to do this step while I'm working on the silicone mat. And I'm going to place adhesive on each of the pieces. This is a good time to be thoughtful about which side is up and which side is the back. I do have to admit that on occasion I get so busy working that I forget and I put adhesive on the side that I intended to be the front. So do pay a little bit of attention that you're getting the adhesive on the correct side of your 4 triangles. So if this is going to be the green side up, then now we need to put adhesive on the green side of these so that the floral side can be up. One other thing that I would mention about this is that you might need to consider the directionality of your DSP. So think ahead. Is your card going to be horizontal or vertical? Or which way are you going to flip the triangles? And make sure that you're cutting your DSP in a way that would make sense. In the case of this paper, there's no right side or wrong side. This could be up or down. This looks fine. The flowers look fine in this direction. They look fine in this direction. But sometimes paper will have a top and a bottom. So just plan ahead and make sure that you know which way your DSP needs to face and that you cut your paper accordingly. Now we're going to go ahead and mount our triangles onto our paper. Now really you're doing this by eye, and your goal is to leave a little bit of a white border around each of your triangles. So this can be a little tricky, especially placing the first piece. So what I like to do is I like to gently place them without firmly adhering them. That way, if I need to slightly adjust them, I still have the ability to wiggle them a little bit. Another good way to do that is, instead of using the snail, would be to use the Tombow green glue. And the Tombow green glue will also allow you some repositioning capability. And so now I'm going to go ahead and place the shorter triangles. Again, keeping in mind that you're trying to leave some white space between the triangles here in the center, which adds visual interest. You get that full effect of matting the paper if you can leave some white border. I'm going to go ahead and give them a little press with my fingers and make sure they're adhered down. And then I just wanted to check which way the card opened and made sure that I had the top. Now, the next thing we need to do is to make our embellishments for the card. I just used my mini Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine with the #1 plate and 2 of the #2 cutting plates. So I made a few peaches here in advance, and I have a few leaves that we can work with, and I have a sentiment label. So you'll notice that the peach doesn't really look like the peach that's here on my card. And that's because first I stamped my peach using the pale papaya ink. I used the Calypso Coral around the edges of the peach to give the peach a 3-dimensional look. So we're going to go ahead and do that together here on the video. This is Calypso Coral, and you'll notice that on my sponge daubers I actually use my label maker to label every single one of them. So this sponge dauber for me is dedicated to Calypso Coral, and so I'm going to use that with my ink. Now I love to work with grid paper, and what's great with grid paper is you can stamp off. If you're trying to get a second generation color of the ink, if you have a stamp that needs to hang over the edge, if you're trying to practice, it's great surface to work with that. But if you don't have grid paper and maybe you're working on your table, I recommend that you have a piece of scrap paper nearby that you can use. So I'm going to go ahead and dab my dauber into my ink pad, and then I'm going to dab it off a few times and try to get that really harsh excess amount of ink off my dauber before I touch it to my peach. Then I'm going to just go around my peach in a half circle, trying to use smooth strokes. You'll notice here I did more of a daubing technique and it looks a little splotchier. And then later I learned if I use smoother strokes with this, I would get a more continuous color. And so I prefer this look over the daubing. I'm going to re-ink before I go to the other side, and I'm going to do this again. And part of what I'm deliberately doing is I'm getting right over to the edge. You'll notice that when you cut out your peach, it leaves a slight amount of white border around your peach. And I want my peaches to be not to have that white border. So I'm also rubbing this ink in all the way to the edges and concealing that white border. So let's see if we can do that on this one as well. And by adding this darker color over the lighter tone, adding the Calypso Coral over the pale Papaya, do you see how this peach really comes to life and it begins to really pop off the page and take on a three-dimensional look? Okay, I think these came out really cute. Wow, they look fantastic. Okay, so here we have the leaves, and for the leaves, I simply used the leaf die and stamped it on white cardstock, and then I cut it out using the leaf die from the peach dies. Now, I could go ahead and use these leaves the way they are, leaving that white border, or I could do what I did on this set, and I used my sponge dauber that's dedicated to Old Olive, and I ran Old Olive over the leaves, and I did that to kind of minimize some of the white and add some shading to the leaves. Just so that we can see something different, I'm going to go ahead and skip that step with these. What's kind of nice about the leaves is with the white border, I think they'll pop better against the DSP. So this time I'm going to try something slightly different than what I did on my sample card. Okay, so I'm going to ink up my Have a Peachy Day sentiment and stamp it on my sentiment label that I already cut out. I like to line up the sentiment with a straight line on my grid paper, making sure that the label is positioned straight, that my stamp is straight on the block, and then go ahead and stamp my image. So that came out great. I got a really great impression. I'm excited about that. And I'm just going to quickly use my Stampin' Chamois to clean off that Calypso Coral. Calypso Coral will stain stamps. You can see mine are starting to turn a little bit. In addition to stamping this, we're going to go ahead and decorate the inside of our card as well. So if you remember, I told you to have 2 pieces of basic white. So while I have the Calypso Coral open, I'm going to go ahead and ink up my happy birthday sentiment in the Calypso Coral and center that. Give that a nice stamp. That looks great. And I'm also going to come back with the pale Papaya, and I'm going to stamp a peach down here in the corner. I'm going to deliberately try to make this go a little bit off the edge. That will make things look more natural. It's kind of an art technique that it's great when things slightly go off the edge to add some visual interest. And I'm going to come in with the Pear Pizazz and stamp our leaves. I'm going to line up the bottom part of that leaf with the top of the peach, just nest that right in there and give that a stamp. Again, deliberately having some of that stamp go off the edge, and you'll see here that's why it's so great to have the grid paper. The grid paper catches that for you. Now, I am going to grab my dauber and use the Calypso Coral and just add a little bit of highlight to the peach. I'm not going to do as much as I did on the outside. Since the peach isn't cut out, I run the risk if I get too close to the edge of going outside the peach, and I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to add a little bit of highlighting and shading on the peach without being as dramatic as I was on the outside. And then lastly, I'm going to bring in the Balmy Blue. Now the Balmy Blue may seem odd, but if you look at the DSP, it actually has little Balmy Blue flowers in the DSP. You can maybe see it a little bit better on this one where I haven't yet mounted. And so we're going to mimic that using the floral stamp from this set. And we're going to add a few little flowers around our peach just for a little bit more interest. Oh, how cute is that? Okay, so now that we have our inside piece, let's go ahead and attach that inside the card. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and put our insert inside of the card. I just have some adhesive, some Stampin' Seal adhesive on the back. And we're going to go ahead and visually eyeball, leaving a little bit of a border around all four edges. Looks sweet. Okay. And then on the outside, we're going to use our Stampin' Dimensionals. So you'll notice here that I've popped up the two peaches. Maybe let's try something a little bit different. Maybe let's try 3 peaches this time. And maybe the first peach I'm going to put directly down on the card base instead of popping this one up. And then we'll go ahead and put the dimensionals on our peaches. See if we can't find a good place for those. I'm just using 2 based on the size of the dimensionals and the size of the peach. I think that'll be adequate. And I'm going to go ahead and place this peach maybe right about here. That's a nice little cluster of peaches. And then we need to go ahead and put down our leaves and our sentiment. Now, if you had some coordinating ribbon, you could think about putting ribbon on this card as well. I deliberately opted not to put the ribbon on. I didn't want to cover up these white borders and the triangle pattern. I really wanted to expose that. So my preference was to opt without the ribbon this time. And again, I'm bringing in my silicone sheet as I put adhesive on my leaves. I do think I like that look on the leaves of leaving the white border outline. I think it helps the leaves stand out a little bit more. So in addition to considering adding ribbon to this, another way that you could really embellish this card would be you could consider cutting out some of the small flowers using the dies in the peach die set. So if we look right here, there's a die in your die set that cuts out these little blue flowers, and we could find a place to arrange these on our card and embellish our card with the little flowers if we wanted to. Another idea for how you could give your card even more pop would be to bring in the 2021-2023 in color jewels. And in here are some jewels that are pale papaya, and you could consider finding a place on your card to maybe put some of the jewels. My style is on the simpler side. I like to add some punch, but I don't want to overpower my triangle layout and my popped up peaches, so I think I'm happy with my card just the way it is. Okay, now that we've finished our Sweet as a Peach card, I thought maybe I'd show you some other samples. This is the card we just made together with the 3 peaches. This was the sample that I started the video with 2 peaches. And then here's a slightly different version, and you can see how this version is different is that I used the green on the vertical instead of on the horizontal triangles. So you can see the difference there if you put those side by side of when the green is up top versus the green on the side. So there's some different variations on our peach card, but I've also done the same thing with some other designer series paper. Here's the triangle layout using the Flower and Field designer series paper that was free in January and February of 2021 during Celebration. And so in this case, I used 2 separate pieces of designer series paper. This yellow polka dot is not the reverse side of the daisy. And whatever was on the back of the daisy was not a pattern that I wanted to coordinate with the daisies. And so I used the suggestion that I offered earlier in the video of cutting 2 separate rectangles, cutting them both into triangles, and then pulling the papers in that I wanted. So you can see I used the vertical of the polka dot here and the horizontal of the polka dot here, and then these are the opposing triangles for the daisies. So this is literally two rectangles, each cut into triangles, and then I mixed and matched the paper together so that I could get the coordinating patterns that I wanted. And then I matched it up in this case with the medium daisy punch, and in this case with the large daisy punch. So again, you can see I've used an embellishment of a button, I used embellishment of ribbon, just a tiny amount of ribbon at the very bottom, but a few ideas of how you can do things with the layout there. I also have this sample where I used the Oso Ombre paper. This was also free during Celebration. And I used the Here's to Strong Women stamp set. This is now retired. These are some older samples of cards I had on my desk. And again, this die is from the Stitch So Sweetly set, the same die set that we used for Have a Peachy Day. Instead, I used this die from that same set. These stars are from the Stitched Stars dies, which are current and still available. Here's another version of the triangle layout. This adds some visual interest by using specialty designer series paper. If you can see there, this paper has gold foil in it, and so that really gives the card a lot of pop. But on this card, I used the Artistically inked stamp set. This was new in the annual catalog that just came out in May of 2021. This is a gorgeous stamp set. It makes these beautiful roses that you see here on the card. And the sentiment comes from that same stamp set, but I used the Pick a Banner punch. This is the Pick a Banner punch, and that helped me to create that sentiment. And then here's just 2 more samples. Again, pointing out how you can do a horizontal layout if you like, or a vertical layout. This is using the Forever and Always bundle that just retired, sadly. But I used a few different techniques here. I did add some Blushing Bride ribbon onto this card. I thought it worked better on the vertical than it does on the horizontal, in my opinion. And used a combination of stamping the sentiment versus cutting the sentiment with the dies. And of course, this gorgeous paper that went with this bundle really makes the card stunning. So hopefully you can see that there are really endless options to use the triangle layout, whether you're making something more casual and simple or getting really fancy with your designer series paper. And it works with floral, stars, it works with peaches, it works really with anything. I hope you'll give this triangle layout a try. Now, if you've enjoyed watching this video, I would really appreciate it if you'd give the video a thumbs up. That would really help me. And if you'd like to be notified when I post future videos, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and click on the notification bell so that you'll be notified each time I post a new video. If you don't already have a Stampin' Up! Demonstrator, I'd be honored to be your demonstrator. Please leave me a comment or get in touch, and I'd be happy to help you place an order. You can also go to StampinUp.com and search for me as your demonstrator, Holly Michelson, Del Mar, New York. Thanks so much for watching. Until the next video. Bye.